In this lesson, we're going to look at the process for performing a Windows Server 2012 installation. Now, in this demonstration, I'm going to install to a virtual machine, but I'm going to use traditional install methods. Essentially, I'm emulating a physical box by inserting the media for the Windows Server 2012. So you can see here I have the ISO file mapped to the virtual machine. This would be the same as you actually booting a physical server from a CD or a USB stick. So the first thing you're going to see when you're doing this is I'm going to turn it on, and it's going to say press a key to boot from that CD or DVD. It is now loading those files initially from the media. And if you remember back to when I showed you the files on the media, we saw two WIM files, an install.wim and a boot.wim. As you can see here, this initial boot up is actually coming from the content of the boot.wim file. This is the Windows pre-installation environment. And then later on, once I select an image, that image will be laid down from the install.wim. So it's giving me initial configuration for my language, my country, and my keyboard input method. I'm going to accept the defaults. If you are having a problem with your machine, I could select the repair your computer. So it's always good to keep the media around or a USB stick so you can perform recoveries of problem installations. But for now, I'm going to perform an installation now. It's doing some quick checks on my hardware. I can now select the version. Now in this case, I'm going to perform a normal server with a GUI, but notice what the default was. The default was a server core installation. So I'm going to select server with a GUI, remembering I can always remove the graphical interface and the management infrastructure at a later time. Notice I only have options for x64. There is no 32-bit version of Windows Server 2012. So if you have servers that only have 32-bit processors, you will need to either replace the processors in those servers or replace the server completely. I select my version. I read the EULA. I can select if I want to do an upgrade or a custom. So if I'm going to perform a fresh installation, I'm going to perform a custom install. This is a fresh installation of Windows. I can now select where I want to install to. So in this case, this disk already has some content, but what I want to do is click the Drive Options Advanced, and I can now delete all those existing partitions. So if this wasn't a fresh machine, go through and delete all of the drives, providing there is no data on them you actually need. I now have an unallocated space. I don't need to manually create any partitions. Now, if you were not seeing the disks you needed that you know are in your system, the probability is Windows Server 2012 does not contain the storage drivers for the storage controller you have in your server. At this point, you would click Load Driver, insert a USB key or other media, load in the driver for that storage controller, and then the disk connected to it would then be displayed. So I'm just going to select that unallocated space, click Next, and the installation will proceed automatically. Now in the background, it's going to create two partitions. That system partition of 350 megabytes, which is the default for Windows Server 2012, and then a boot partition, which will actually contain the operating system. On this existing Windows Server 2012 installation, you can see those are the partitions it creates by default. That 350 megabyte system reserved, which does not have a drive letter assigned. You cannot see this in Normal Explorer. I can see C, I can see any data volumes I have. I cannot see that system reserved. And then I have my boot volume. This contains the Windows folder, program files, etc. The system reserved partition, this 350 megabytes, is there for a number of reasons. It actually contains our boot data, so it's the information needed to actually boot the operating system initially before it loads the rest of the content from the boot drive. But it also contains recovery information to help perform repair operations. And if you're using BitLocker, BitLocker encrypts the entire system volume, i.e. the entire C drive. And so you need a method to perform that initial unencryption. So this system reserved partition is kept unencrypted, and it only contains enough information to initiate that OS boot, decrypt the C drive, so the complete Windows Server 2012 boot can be performed. So that's why you have this sort of hidden partition. Installation is now continuing, so I'm going to just let that complete. So we can see the copying of files has now been completed. It's performed an initial boot into the operating system, where it's going to perform some customizations. It's going to run the specialization phase of what was sysprepped to create that SID and the GUID for the operating system. It's going to scan what hardware is available. So that is a fresh install of Windows Server 2012. The only information I have to enter when I first boot into the operating system is a new password for the administrator. So this is the local administrator account. So I type that password twice and I hit finish. It's then going to finalize the installation. And there we are complete. We have done a new install. There is one other item I did want to cover, and it's the ability to boot from a virtual hard disk. So what I did in this demonstration is effectively we installed the operating system directly onto the hardware. Now, although it was a virtual machine, we basically formatted the hard drives as we saw them and laid down our Windows files, our program files, directly on the native file system. Another option is we can actually create a virtual hard disk file on our C drive, for example, and actually boot a physical piece of hardware from a VHD file now. So this gives us more flexibility in being able to move a deployed operating system between different hardware, and also potentially being able to move a physically deployed OS into a virtual machine very, very easily by just taking the VHD and moving it to a hypervisor. To do this, we actually make a slight change to our installation process, which I'll actually demonstrate now.